Uh, Hello everyone. I said the ontology was the last recitation, but I wanted to make a video for you about the suggestions in your final exam and which topics to study. Kind of a general reputation and what we have done since the midterm. So let me move on to my suggestions. I will divide them into three topics. In the topic of philosophy of language, I suggest you to look into the topics sense and reference of singular terms. This is phrase distinction, revising and Bedeutung. We talked about this one. This is very important, fellows. You should look at this as what is the sense or reference of a singular term, their relation to meaning. The definitions of these two are really important. Second, you should have a look at Frege's puzzles. We covered two puzzles in this course. They were identity puzzle and propositional attitude puzzle. And these are important because this is the way how Frege structure his ideas in the sense and reference difference, and these puzzles lead the way to like seeing the problem and then solving it. So identity puzzle and propositional attitude puzzle, I cannot emphasize this enough. You should definitely know what they are, analyze them, and how do we solve them. You should understand them really clearly. And then you need to have the distinctions categoramatic and syncatogrammatic, and then sub-distinctions under those terms. You should be familiar with that tables, and you should know in the definitions of these terms categoramatic, syncatogrammatic, and under them there were subcategories. You should be familiar with them. Okay, other than that, we have talked about extensions and intensions. These were both in language and ontology parts of our course. You should also be knowing these terms and definitions of these terms and examples of these terms, like what was an extension and what we said was an example of these extensions. Like for instance, we said numbers, we said sets. These were important, arkadaşlar. You should know this, and like you should know this by heart right now. Extension and intention difference and their definitions and examples of these things. Okay, let's move on to ontology with this one. In ontology, we had a table that we distinguished objects into concrete and abstract, and we had definitions about them. And you should be really familiar with these definitions. What was a concrete object? We talked about the space-time and we defined abstractness. And then we moved on to mental and physical distinctions under the category concrete. You should be really familiar and be clear in your mind about these definitions, and you should be able to giving your own examples about them at this point. Like what was a mental thing, what was the definition, what is its distinction from a physical, which category was this mental was under, what which subcategory this mental belongs to, was under like it was under the concrete category, right? You should be familiar with this right now, and you should be able to give examples to this, and you should be able to give examples to durable or instantaneous difference in both of these categories, like mental and physical, and then durable and instantaneous and concrete, abstract, and so on. I suggest you to make a big table, like then write all of this. First, like divide the page into two, like concrete and abstract, and then in a second coordinates you can write mental and physical, and then subdivide them into instantaneous and so on. So you should have a table with three coordinate axes, and you should have like eight total entities, and then this was ontology part, and the definitions are always important. Understanding them well, and then be able to clearly think about them and formulate your own examples. These are important. And let's move on. In the ontology part, there is Aristotle's category of objects. I didn't cover this one in the recitation, but I think David Hoca just really clearly explained it and give examples in the lecture. So you should rewatch those parts if you are not comfortable enough in this subject. You should know this Aristotle category of objects, tropes, and so on. These are important in ontology, and you should be familiar with them too. So let's move on to our last topic, philosophy of science. And in the beginning of philosophy of science, we defined what a scientific hypothesis is, what its form should look like. If you don't have an idea or the lectures were not clear for you, you should look upon them on the internet and find what a scientific hypothesis is, what its structure looks like, and then you can look at what a scientific theory consists of, and then you should be familiar with the instances of scientific hypothesis. Let's say there were forms, sentences in the form all F's are G's formed, and we say that they're instantiated into FA then GA. This was an instance of a scientific hypothesis, and if it's confirmed or verified, it was a positive instance. Uh, let's say you say protons and electrons attract each other. This is your hypothesis. If something is a proton, it will attract an electron, and you're just observing. Let's say you're able to observe one proton and one electron in a specific context in your laboratory, and if turn out positive, you're observing them, and it actually you see that electrons are moving towards the protons, and you see those movements. This is a positive instantiation of those hypotheses, and you should know these terms like positive and negative instantiation, and what an hypothesis is, and then what a theory is. And other than that, in philosophy of science, we talked about the testing of hypotheses, and there were different things. There were like verification, confirmation, and falsification. You should be able to distinguish between these three, and you should be able to give the definitions of confirmation and verification. How does the inductive processes leads to confirmation? You should be familiar with those ones, and you should be familiar of Popper's ideas and why he is against this confirmation and against even increasing the probability of something by induction. What was Popper's case and why he's rejecting this confirmation case for scientific hypothesis and so on. You should be familiar with Popper. He's a really important figure and caused a shift in ideas about science. So let's move on. We said that you should be familiar with form of scientific hypothesis, and also you should be able to define for all of these three things we talk about, or previous in our class we talked about different sub fields in philosophy like metaphysics, epistemology, ontology, philosophy of language, logic. You should be able to give definitions of those fields at this point. You should know what epistemology studies, and you should be able to distinguish from ontology, what philosophy of language studies, what philosophy of science studies. These are general things you should have known. And one last thing, in ontology, I forgot to mention this one. You should be able to distinguish between universals and particulars and know about this problem with universals. Okay, these are all the topics that I suggest you to study and focus on before your midterm, before your final. And I know it sounds much and you have a short amount of time, you think, but really these are like basics and definitions and terms. It shouldn't take too much time. I think all of you have a chance to get high points if you are focusing on these subjects and study them in a correct way, like understanding them rather than trying to memorize them, understanding the definitions really well and knowing them by heart, and then you should be able to formulate your own thoughts about these things. But first of all, you should be able to, let's say, differentiate physical and mental. Rather than understanding the definitions really well, there is no way to do the philosophy. Like first things first, you should understand the definitions of all these terms and should be able to use them. Like you're using the words you learn when you're 5 years old. You're like very comfortable in your own natural language, and you should be discomfortable with these terms. That's my suggestion. Hope you all luck. Do not panic and don't make anxiety. I suggest you all well. Don't panic about this final and your other finals. Wish you all luck and see you.